Mike Govoni, it is an honor to have you back on the podcast. I've had the opportunity to work with you for 4 months. When I had you on the podcast originally, we stopped the podcast and I was like, how can I work with you? Your story meant so much to me. I just felt it was this staircase to a temple of understanding of oneself. So I wanted to bring you back on to tell us a little bit more about who you are, what you're doing, and kind of how you got there and in some different detail. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
For sure, Tanya, it's really a pleasure to be here. So thanks for having me. And wow, what a beautiful metaphor, right? A staircase to the temple of understanding. I feel like humbled, and that's beautiful. Um, so yeah, I really want this to be about your listeners. And I know you're going to ask me questions about my life, but I think my message just right off the bat is, we all have a story and we've all been through trials and tribulations, and everyone's pain is enough. So my story, it may be a little unique, it may not be, but really I got started uh, by having to overcome what I call these Mount Everest like hurdles. And I think for one, it started in the womb when I was in my mother's womb, like all of us start. And, my mom experienced a lot of stress and trauma when I was in utero. And I think that was the beginning of my neurobiology, my brain and nervous system and immune system to epigenetically be geared towards addiction, towards disease, towards an imbalance, because I was stressed right off the rip. And that set the stage really for what I would have to overcome, those Mount Everest like hurdles. And the first one being trauma, and being born into a mother and a father who had an immense backstory, and really grandparents that had an immense backstory too. My grandmother experienced some life situations which were challenging, 4 or 5 kids, and my grandfather died early. My mother didn't grow up with a father. So, my mom was stressed to begin with. And my dad had his own skeletons in the closet, which we can get into, which are pretty deep. My dad was a Catholic priest before or when he met my mother. And then he became a born-again Christian minister as he had children and left the priesthood. And and he had a lot of baggage, let's just say. You can only imagine where that story may go. And it did go there. My dad was part of the clergy abuse scandal, and I grew up and I didn't know that until I found out his secrets, just like my mother did. So once again, here's the beginning of a story of being born into generational trauma and having to really be dealt with all of that, and having to navigate that as a young kid. And it wasn't easy. And as you can only imagine, just from our work together and the work I do in the world today, I became addicted. And once again, I like to say we don't become addicted because something's wrong with us. We become addicted because things happen to us. And a lot of us experience more trauma than most, and that's why I use drugs and alcohol to escape the pain. So those chapters of the book, or the Mount Everest like hurdles, for my particular story, would be childhood trauma, would be addiction. As we know, the issues are in the tissues, right? The body and the viscera hold the traumatic activation. The disease leads to disease. And 10 years into recovery, or 9 years, I got diagnosed with irritable bowel disease. And that was a very, very challenging, very challenging time in my life. And part of it was due to having to keep busy and having to stay on the go and not allowing my nervous system to be able to relax. And a lot of these unconscious things that were driving me due to the trauma. And then I think the fourth chapter to the book would be spiritual awakening. And that's as a result of having that much trauma. As Peter Levine says, one of the 4 doorways into spiritual awakening in the Buddhist and Tao traditions is death, meditation, tantric sex, and trauma. So trauma and meditation were my doorways into healing, into shift in consciousness. And really, that's that's the dragon I had to slay, per se, from Joseph Campbell's work, right? We all have a story. We're the heroes of our own story, right? Tanya, you're the hero of your story, doing beautiful work. And we come back with this elixir, whatever it may be, shift in consciousness, different gifts that we can now access. And I think we're all on this journey to some degree.
Mike, did you know during that time that there was something more meant for you in this lifetime? Or were you brought to such a standstill in your own suffering that you just couldn't even imagine?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's different layers to that. There are times in my life where I was in corporate America and I was like, damn, this is it. Like, how can I just sit in this cubicle all day and just make phone calls? Like, are you serious? I can't, this can't possibly be it. And in some of those instances, I thought that was it. And then the divine or the universe or whatever you want to call it, it kept on poking me. And I had to answer the call or the poke. Joseph Campbell said, you have to answer the call. And so I kept getting poked in the aspect of I wasn't happy. My body was sick. I couldn't do the job anymore. And then that led to the illness, which the illness for me was the apex. It was the catalyst. It was the crucible that birthed something else. And for me, that pain that I had to experience on that next level of chronic illness was the one that broke me open to shifting my perception, right? How I saw the world, how I saw myself, how I saw what happened to me, into a deeper understanding of, oh my God, this is preparing me for something greater. And that was a monumental moment when I sat on the bench of my company's picnic table outside the office, and I was looking at these trees. And in that moment, the mind was still. The trees were perfectly still. The committee in my head was no longer spinning around. There was a tree in the background with its leaves just shimmering like diamonds. And I had this insight, and the insight was, you're no longer here to save up per se or be driven by this material aspect, although I do like nice things. You're here to help people suffer less. And I like to say today, my motive shifted from my sole purpose of trying to accumulate property and a BMW 745 by the time I was, 30 years old, to now saying, oh my God, there's a greater purpose for me. And that's to help alleviate the suffering of others and help them shift their consciousness and heal. And it doesn't mean I may not drive a BMW 745 one day, but my whole trajectory has changed. The energy has shifted. And now I get to do something I love, yes, and make money, and we'll see where it goes from here. But that's when that pivotal moment happened, where I knew this pain was to birth the purpose.
Sorry, my cat just went nuts in the cat box. Like sometimes he has this thing where he just won't stop
scratching. Yeah.
Oh my God, my son come. So what I also wanted you to add, and I want to see at what time point this was in relation to, is when you stepped out of Western medicine.
I stepped out of Western medicine when they no longer could provide me with support that made sense to me and that actually helped me get well. At the end, I was on all these drugs, and I appreciate it. They gave a hell of an effort. And that was 2014. I had 2 organs on the table at that point. I was on an immunologic drug for the ulcerative colitis called Remicade, and it began to shut down my liver to the point where I was developing autoimmune hepatitis. And the GI doctor sent me to the hepatologist and said, you need to go check out your liver because your liver enzymes are through the roof. And so they did a liver biopsy. It came back as autoimmune hepatitis, and they said, you have to do something about this now, or in about 8 years, your liver will be shot and you'll need a liver transplant. So at that point, I used to take, at that point, I knew I had to make an adjustment. And I looked these 2 doctors in the face in one of the best hospitals in the world, Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts. And I said, okay, it's time to go. And I left there and I never looked back.
It must have been devastating to be in recovery and being told that your liver and organs were failing. It must have been like, are you kidding me? I've been sober. I've been working so hard at being sober all these years, and you're telling me that my body's dying anyway. Did you feel that at all?
Um, I, I, I can't say I felt that, but let me shift that a little bit so how your listeners may be able to identify. If you're still in recovery today and you're suffering from immense depression, anxiety, say you have irritable bowel syndrome or IBS or IBD, say you have fibromyalgia, or say your body is sick, um, I invite you to ask the question of how your biography, what happened to you, what you lived through, is now affecting your biology. In fact, when intravenous drug users develop hepatitis and AIDS, it's not even the, let's say, it's not even, well, let me back up. It's the actual trauma that allows them and puts them in that place to develop those illnesses. Because what are we doing? We're trying to use the substances to kill our pain. And in the process, we do things that we're not proud of. We share needles. We have sex, unprotected sex. We put ourselves in harm's way. And where I'm going with that is, even if you're in long-term recovery right now and your body's sick or your mental health is unstable, then that's an invitation to ask yourself, how might my past still be living in my body today? Once again, the issues are in the tissues. So for me, I wasn't so much in a pity pot of my liver shutting down. I was like, holy shit, how did this happen? And how do I get out of it? And I didn't have time to think about possibly using drugs or alcohol. It never crossed my mind. I thought about taking my own life because I was in that much pain with multiple chemical sensitivity. That was on top of the irritable bowel disease, and because of the liver, your liver digests and toxins. I thought about taking my own life, but I didn't think about, oh, poor me, how did I get here after 10 years of being sober and now I'm sick? But if you're in recovery today and you're sick and you're not feeling well, mental health, physical health, I invite you to ask yourself, how might my story may be living in my tissues? And how can I take a integrative approach to find healing versus beyond some sort of regimen? And not to say that pharmaceuticals are totally bad, but let's be real, they're not addressing the root cause, they're just treating the symptoms. So how do we begin to really address the root cause and actually heal and find homeostasis in this body and have our life again and feel comfortable in our own body?
I just had the visual, that caveman graph where you have the different Homo sapiens kind of moving through this story and into the walking upright man. If
Mm-hmm.
we could look at that at a suffering standpoint and kind of draw that out, and then walking away as an enlightened kind of, a person that's really woken up. At that time in your life, were you deeply spiritual, or what was it? What was it that brought you to your knees that you were like, spiritually, beyond the circumstances, that made you reach for the next best thing?
Yeah, another great question. The pain of multiple chemical sensitivity and the inflammation that was in my brain was so painful, meaning I was responding to chemicals from the outside environment, and I would breathe them in, let's say, through my nose, through the olfactory. The sense of smell goes directly to the amygdala, your fight or flight mechanism in your brain. This is why maybe like rape victims, if they smell booze, on someone's breath years later, it can trigger, or just in general, you can get triggered by smells really easily, because the hippocampus is an limbic system, and the smell and the memories are very closely linked. So I was breathing in these toxins, let's just say regular air that you would be able to tolerate. I had no glutathione system. I had blew my antioxidant system. So my tissue my tissues were taking the brunt of the free radicals. So my brain was inflamed, and my amygdalas, my fight or flight mechanisms, were completely on alarm 24 hours a day. And when I breathed these chemicals in, it would put me in a state of immense fight or flight. And I had these two parts of my brain talking to each other. One is the limbic brain saying, alarm, 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 something's dangerous here, right? That's the amygdalas. They're the smoke detector of your brain. And then I had a little bit of my prefrontal cortex engaged saying, no, 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 there's no threat. There's no threat. And I had this other part saying, no, there's a threat. Yeah, there's a threat. No, there's a threat. And I had this tug of war going inside. One is a survival response, right? Trying to say there's a danger here. And sometimes there was, because at that point, my tissues were taking the brunt, and I was inflamed, and I was suffering. So to answer your question, is a guy like me had to go through something like that to finally be so stimulated that I had to come to the present moment. Because if you can only imagine the dangers going off in my nervous system, I needed to calm it. I needed to calm my body. I needed to calm my mind. Now, no one knew what to do with me at that point, although my therapist told me to go see a neurofeedback practitioner. And before I even saw her, I was beginning to meditate. Now, when I say meditate, I wasn't like just sitting on the cushion for 5 minutes, 10 minutes saying, okay, I'm done with my practice. I was so overstimulated that I had to leave my job. I had to leave my whole life. And I was in the woods. I was in the woods retreating from the stimulation, trying to find the present moment. And over time of practice and solitude and practice and breathing, and really coming to a point in my life where I was breathing to the present moment to save my sanity. And sure enough, from that, I had a profound spiritual awakening. And I came to a point where I realized that, oh my God, what was going on in my mind and what was actually really happening were two different things.
Wow. And that's what I wanted to ask you really quick, just so my listeners can identify, is I feel like when people are brought up to that point, they really identify with the fact that they believe they're insane. They deeply believe they're broken. Were you there before? Were you right up to that threshold before you had the spiritual awakening where you were like, I'm completely broken, I'm insane, I'm mentally ill?
Yeah, I didn't know if I was going to live or die, and I thought I was losing it. And on the same context, when you have this type of awakening, let's say, some people might call it a Kundalini awakening. Like, you can think you're going crazy, and you're not going crazy. You're actually having a reorganization of everything you thought was reality. And, and in moments did I think I wasn't going to make it through? Absolutely. But when I stayed in stillness and faced that fear and didn't react to the emotion of it, I broke free, and something else was birthed, a new consciousness. I literally was changing my gene expression to produce anti-inflammatory genes, because I eventually healed from irritable bowel disease by shifting my consciousness. If you look up the work of Joe Dispenza, he explains this so beautifully. And that's exactly what happened to me. Is the whole reorganization, I actually entered into coherence, heart mind coherence, and I had that experience of rapture, of bliss, of just amazingness, and it reorganized everything in my mind and body, or I should say mind body, because they're one, they're not two.
When you were spending time in the forest doing this, was there prayer involved as you got there, or what?
Is there absolutely there was prayer. I was pleading with the divine to not take me. Like I was hugging trees and asking for their strength. And as Dr. Porter says, what he calls, or in the Japanese, they call it forest bathing. I was forest bathing. I was connecting with the forest. I was getting getting the trees energies. I was pleading for the divine. And as one of my meditation teachers says, he says, you can ring your bells, you can light your incense, you can chant the night away, and you can ask God to come, but be careful. When he comes, he's going to come. And you better be ready, or it comes, she comes, whatever the divine is. I'm not saying it's a masculine he, but Yeah, so the divine showed up, and once again, these experiences are beyond conceptualization. They're beyond words. And once again, let me simplify it a little bit for the listeners too. Is you can have these profound states, but through meditation, through psychedelics, through near-death experiences. I mean, they happen in all different forms. Um, and I'm no one special. We all have access to this awakening within us. I just happen to have enough suffering to have it happen. So it's beautiful today. And at the same time, I think a message that I would give is to just coming back to the moment and actually seeing what's in front of you and realizing that your thoughts are your thoughts. They really are like clouds passing through a blue sky. You are the blue sky. These thoughts are just thoughts, right? Think about it like this. A flower secretes nectar. A flower secretes an aroma, right? That's what a flower does, a rose, a lily. That's just the natural, process of it. Well, your mind secretes thoughts. That's what it does. It's like a thought spewing machine. But when you can begin to rest in stillness a little bit, you begin to see that proliferation happens naturally, and you're not it. You're not the actual thoughts. So there's no suffering in the inherent present moment. Suffering takes time. It takes past. It takes future. But when you can touch the present moment, you can touch into the joy. You can touch into the peace. You can touch into the absolute wonders that are actually here. And that's as simple as we can take it and without getting caught up in this whole mystical experience stuff.
Okay, I want to break it down for people that may be going through something similar, because I feel like this is a great time of awakening for so many. So
Mm-hmm.
let's, if you can, talk about the layers of awakening. So what I imagine is that when you first were hit with the divine and bliss, everything stopped. Like you don't have a plan of who you're going to be, your purpose in life. All of a sudden, you're just connected to everything. And then it takes a lot of time and mindfulness, and it's a progress to get to where you are today as a coach, as a healer. Is that, can you break that down for us?
Yeah, for sure. And after these experiences, or when someone has like a real shift in consciousness, there's an integration process. I mean, coming back into this body and just like, oh my God, here I am in the world, was challenging. It also developed a challenge that, oh my God, I had this profound spiritual experience. Oh, now I'm somebody, which is just another concept, and this is how like gurus get, I think, a little twisted sometimes is they can still identify and puff the ego up and all that. And I really had to just come back to the earth and integrate that experience. I found a meditation teacher and told her the story, and she listened to me and she shook her head. And I said, wait, you understand this? And she said, yes. I said, this happened to you? And she said, yes. And I said, oh my God. So anyways, so she helped me integrate the experience and come back here. And then I knew my life was going to be different. I knew I had a different purpose. I knew I had a different blueprint. And that started, it wasn't crystal clear to me per se. I started taking some of my experience as a holistic health and wellness coach and begin to work with people on that level. And then I started studying under a naturopathic doctor, and then really realized who was coming to me, and that was people in recovery, and really they were looking for healing. And then I really got into the trauma work and the somatic work and Dr. Peter Levine. And basically I started to bring all these different pieces in, like all of us do who work as practitioners or integrated practitioners. I started bringing all these pieces in and then saying, oh, okay, I'm here to support people who are in recovery to experience deeper healing, awakening, right? And that's kind of what I've niched in at this point, is healing beyond recovery.
Yes, that's beautiful. And you kind of clarified it for me. I was wondering why and if your clientele is specifically people in recovery, and why that is. Or do you think that that could change a little bit, that people in their own process of resolution of trauma are going to be coming to you?
Yeah, I love this question again. And do I think it's going to change? Sure, because it's always changing. I think right now I've kind of stumbled in an area that is very much needed, right? The recovery community is deep. There's a lot of us, and yet there's so many beautiful paths to recovery like 12-step or smart recovery or refuge recovery, and yet not many of them are talking about the traumatic activation that's still stuck in our nervous system long after we put the drugs and alcohol down. And how do we resolve that so we don't need to pick up something from the external environment to soothe that? That's why we did drugs in the first place. The dysregulation, the anxiety, depression, the loneliness, the pain. So to help people right now, that's where I am. And do I think it will change? Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that in my own experience working with you, and I bet this is kind of a common theme, is I couldn't recognize my own trauma until I stopped judging it, because especially I think this might be a female thing, that we have so much compassion for everyone else who has suffered more that we don't allow it to be exist or to be recognized. And just recognizing it with you helped me move past it. Is that kind of a first step that you see often with people?
Well, I think your heart is tremendously big, and you I'm not going to say you're unique, but you have this just beautiful gift as the feminine to want to support and to nurture, which I think is beautiful. So you get people on all different spectrums, but for the most part, when we become traumatized, part of trauma, which is powerful, of course, is turning it against ourselves. So developing this false belief that we are not worthy enough, or we're useless, we're, this and that. And we develop these parts of us that are holding this shame, holding this guilt. So that's very common. So helping people to relate to those parts of themselves in a different way by bringing in a sense of sometimes just kindness. Can you relate to yourself in a kind way? And then maybe we can talk about compassionate way, and then maybe even self-love. But some people right off the bat, self-love would make them want to throw up in the trash, because it's just, yeah, it's like self-love. I'm disgusted with myself. But underneath all of that, right, is that pure essence of who we are, right? Is that, Buddha nature? Is that Christ consciousness? Is that Atman? There's perfection, there's wholeness in the imperfection, right? In what happened to us. Yes, a lot of us have done things we're not proud of. And a lot of us have experienced trauma that is really painful, and things happen to us that weren't our fault. And we develop those beliefs that really aren't true. And to really help the person see that and see those beliefs and create a different relationship and ultimately a new belief about themselves is really beautiful.
I think there was something that happened to me also while I was working with you that was really profound, and I was hoping you could speak to grief a little bit, because recognizing some stuff that I hadn't processed in myself and us just holding space for me to grieve that, I really felt like there was something I should do to fix that grief. There was something next, but I was shocked at how much just holding space and recognizing the grief was all I needed to let it go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As I was taught, beautiful quote, it's the truth that liberates, not your effort to be free. So, the truth of just seeing what happened to us, right? What happened to us, and holding that in that compassionate presence is tremendously healing, right? Without having to do anything but just bear witness to it. I'll give an example. I was one of those kids that bounced his head. I don't know if you've ever come across them, but certain kids, they bounce their head when they go to sleep. They bounce their head in the car. I was singing to God, all this different stuff. And I was a little ashamed about it. I was, never let my friends see that I was a bouncing kid. And my sister would talk, my sister would, make jokes about me when I was a kid. But, when I was on my healing journey, I had this insight. Oh my God, I was bouncing because I was self-soothing. I was self-regulating. I didn't have a mother to coddle me and hold me. And even in this moment, I can still feel like almost like tears, because that little boy was trying to find that comfort. And yet I was bouncing my head. And that's what was so soothing to me, was that motion. and I had to grieve that little boy that didn't have a mother, to hold me, and that he had to bounce his head. So there's many aspects of us that are holding this grief, and to really just allow ourselves to hold that and see that for what it is, and bring that compassion awareness to it, so we can be with it, and we can allow the activation of grief and the sadness that follows grief to move through us, versus having us come up against it and just keep stuffing it down and stuffing it down. And that's when we become free. That's when we begin to experience that freedom, is when we are free from the underlying emotions that are connected to these younger wounded parts of ourselves.
Also, I want to talk about the value of your ability to hold space. And when I first started working with you, it was really uncomfortable because you created a space where we really land and we really slow down, and you make it take as long as it needs. Because if we can't co-regulate, we're almost mirroring each other. You wouldn't move from my eyes over the Zoom camera without telling me what you were doing. You were right there with me. And so it was intense in the beginning. When I started to get more used to it, it was exactly what I needed. I could drop right in the container and drop in a little bit more easily, more quickly. There was so much value in that space. I just want to encourage anybody who's listening to find a coach that has the capacity to hold space like that. Can you tell us a little bit about how you learned that, and a little bit about how it works? Because for me, it was incredibly transformative.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Tanya. That really, touches my heart, and knowing that space was really sacred for you to feel open enough to explore and heal, and that's really great. Thank you for that feedback. Um, First, I want to say is we can only hold space to the capacity to which we have held our own suffering. There are plenty of licensed practitioners. Once again, I'm not saying anything against licensed practitioners or doctors, things of that nature. What I'm saying is, if you haven't done your own work and haven't held space for your deepest, darkest places within you, it's impossible to hold that space for others, because the others will trigger that in you if you haven't done your own work. So really, having to face my own suffering prepared me to hold space for people like you. In addition, I should say, is I'm trained in use somatic experiencing, which is a trauma healing modality, a trauma resolution modality, to help the person move the activation and titrate the traumatic activation out of their nervous system in a way that doesn't cause re-traumatization. Now, trauma, there are plenty of people in traumas, like the hot button word right now in coaching, and you have so many people trauma informed. And really, you have to find someone that A, has done their work, or at least presents to do their work, and two, who's someone who is really trained in working with trauma, or else it can be disastrous. And learning through somatic experiencing has prepared me to, for example, use kind of the pillars that Peter teaches us, which is we need to give the body time, we need to give the body space, and we need to give the body support when you're experiencing sensations, images, certain behaviors that come up, affect in the body. When the client is feeling those things, we have to go very slow and picture it like this. Like, say you have a ball of yarn, and the ball of yarn is made up of a bunch of different pieces of yarn. In these sessions, we're just taking out one piece at a time, because over flooding and having a cathartic experience doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy, in that it's integrated back in the system, and that the system can now experience coherence. We want very safe, slow transitions to where your body can literally process and metabolize the trauma so it can be restored to balance. And that's what I was doing with you, was really, first of all, creating a safe container and trust. And then from there, we can actually work into the modalities.
For anybody who's listening, who's interested in working with you that may not be in recovery, are you open to that at that time? At this time?
Well, one thing I like to say, and I do say, is we're all in recovery from something.
Absolutely. Addiction is a spectrum.
Yes. So I'm open to discussing it, and I can usually tell right away if the person is if we're a match for each other, so to speak, if they're ready for this work. And if they're not, I'll just refer out, or let them know. But I'm open to people contacting me who might not necessarily be in recovery from substance abuse, but it may be something else.
Beautiful. So for anybody out there suffering today, can you speak to what they may be able to do to land within themselves and begin to start to hold their own pain?
Yeah, like I said earlier in the conversation, suffering, there's no inherent suffering in the present moment. Suffering takes time. It's past or future. Doesn't mean you can't be in pain, as you may have heard before, that pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. And we suffer when we get lost in the stories of our mind. And if you're suffering today and you're feeling overwhelmed, I encourage you to build a relationship with your breath today. You have the most powerful pharmacy in your body, and your breath is the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, or the unconscious and the conscious. And when you begin to connect with your breath, you begin to unite mind and body, and you can begin to access the present moment. If the breath is not safe for you, or coming to the body is not safe for you, then I suggest accessing the present moment today. So go outside in your backyard or wherever you are, or somewhere warm and cozy, and use your other senses, such as seeing, and just begin to literally let your eyes land in the moment. Look at the trees, look at the dirt, look at the birds, look at the blue sky. See, so many of us who are stuck in trauma responses are living between the chin and the crown of our head, meaning you're stuck in your head all day. You're disassociated from this thing called body, right? So what we have to do is begin to slowly and safely come back to the present moment. The present moment, the present moment, the present moment. And when you begin to access the present moment, you begin to be less out of that activation and more into the here and the now. So connect with your breath, connect with nature, and find the present moment.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the beginning, doing that work with you, I'm like, oh, here we go. I got to look at the tree again. I'm looking at the tree. I'm looking at the leaf. But after a while of doing that, and I'm just saying this because it sounds so cliche, and to some people who are just not ready to jump there, it sounds kind of annoying actually to slow down enough and observe like that. But the shift that I felt within myself of really coming into my body, like as if who I really am and my awakening is a flashlight that wasn't directed in my body at all. And after doing that, I could turn on. The awareness was phenomenal. It was just such a beautiful experience. So I just want to commend you for your compassionate work and everything that we've done together. And it was amazing synchronicity to get to meet you and get to learn from you. So I'm just really grateful for you coming on today.
Yeah, I'm grateful for you too, Tanya. And it's people like you that allow me to understand that my suffering didn't go in vain, right? There was part of me that was like, oh my God, I lived this life and I'm going to suffer. Well, once again, my pain birthed my purpose. And as one of my mentors says, your trauma is a prerequisite to your purpose. So thank you for allowing me to be of service and support you. And it's a relationship of reciprocity. There's so many people out there, these big name people, and they, get too big for people. And and they lose the art of, we're dealing with humans here, and people who are suffering, and just be of service to people like you and others is really a gift. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike.